Digital divide in Guyana is more than a technology issue. It's a complex, interconnected challenge that shapes how students learn, how teachers teach, and how communities grow. Today, we would explore how this divide affects educational outcomes and what can be done to close the gap. The concept map we are examining shows that the digital divide is not caused by one single factor. Instead, it emerges from overlapping social, economic, geographic, and educational conditions that reinforce each other over time. As the document explains, the digital divide is not caused by a single factor but by multiple interconnected social, economic, geographic, and educational conditions that reinforce one another over time. Root causes. Let's begin with the root causes. Poverty and socio-economic inequalities limits families' ability to buy digital devices or pay for reliable internet. Geographic remoteness, especially in Guyana, interior and hinterland regions, create barriers to broadband access, electricity, and other essential ICT services. Example, that would be in Region 8, Monkey Mountain. There, you won't be able to access WhatsApp if you have a meeting on Zoom. If you want to make a call, you won't be able to call straight because the towers and certain infrastructure they don't have there. The document notes that geographic remoteness restricts access to broadband and infrastructures, electricity, and other essential ICT services. At the same time, inadequate ITC infrastructures can and limited teachers' digital competence reduces the effectiveness of technology-based instruction. Historical underinvestment in educational technology left many schools unprepared for the sudden shift to remote learning during the pandemic. Interconnected factors. The root causes interconnect in powerful ways. A family's socioeconomic status determines whether students have access to devices and internet connectivity. Geographic location influences the quality of infrastructure, with coastal schools generally having better infrastructure than the hinterland schools. Another region would be Region 1 is example because you have learners there. They would only, at the secondary school level, they complete their education at grade 9. If they need to write CSEC, they would have to come down to Georgetown and do so because of not having not being equipped to do so in terms of labs and IT room, etc. So they don't write CSEC in those in that region for sure. A certain part, sorry, of that region. Let me just clear that up. National policies and funding determines how resources are distributed across the country, influencing whether digital education is equitable or uneven. Well, we know we have ExxonMobil now, and they're pushing for that in terms of funding. Thank God for that company. So that from 2020 to now, we see a lot of improvement. So In the short term, the digital divide leads to reduced learning time, unlimited access to remote instruction, and increased student disengagement. Students without devices or internet were simply unable to participate fully during school closure. Achievement gap widened significantly during the pandemic, especially between students with reliable digital access and those without, because it's like you miss out everything. You're not there, you're not able to connect, go online, you just, that's it. You're left behind. Especially we talk about that's the short term, the long term educational effect. Over time, the short term disruption accumulate into long term consequences. It's like one dirty build dam. Over a time it will build up. It will just look like, oh man, I missed a 2 hour today, or I didn't get to go on, for the week and all. About one dirty build dam, it will be a mountain in front of you, and eventually you realize like I'm way behind as a learner. Student face loss in terms of accumulative loss, lower school completion rate, and fewer opportunity for higher education and employment. This contributes to a diminished human capital and resources cycle of poverty. As the document highlights, unequal access to digital literacy increases socioeconomic stratification, leaving school, leaving some students better prepared for future opportunities than others. The concept mapping also reveals several feedback loops. One negative loop shows how limited access to technology leads to poor academic performance, fewer economic opportunities, and continued poverty, further limiting access to digital resources. Geographic isolation creates its own cycle. Inadequate infrastructure discourages development, leading to migration and further undevelopment. But there is also a positive loop. Investment in digital infrastructure, improving access to learning, strengthening educational outcomes, boosts economic growth, and increase the capacity for further investment. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of Exxon, and we have other organizations like Right for the Child, they would do the investment in terms of funding to have so that these learners can have access to some of the in terms of have access to what the learners in the region, like example in region 4, are having. Government continue in terms of, that could help in terms of government continue to invest in terms of not just turning a blind eye to those regions, but help in terms of investment with policies. Strong national ICT policies create the foundation for sustainable digital transformation. With the government help too, that will definitely give a boost and help the learners. The document highlights several key findings. The digital divide is driven by socioeconomic, geographic, and educational inequalities. Limited digital access reduces educational equity and student engagement. COVID 19 exposed and intensified existing weaknesses in infrastructure and teachers' preparedness because, basically, if you weren't equipped, you're left behind. If you don't have internet at that time when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, most persons weren't connected had internet service in their home. So that was a challenge by itself. You had some people who had to go over at the neighbor and so on. And even if you had the service, it wasn't that in terms of you didn't have that kind of connection, this strength. It wasn't, you didn't have that amount of bandwidth to push certain things. So you find that when you were online, you keep bouncing on and off and all of that. Things like those in terms of it definitely limit you during that time. And it was then we realized as a country where we actually in standing, how weak our system was, and we weren't really prepared for such. Government initiative help but remains insufficient. Only 48% of public schools were connected through the National Broadband Initiative by 2023 because most of the schools you weren't able to go. Well, we weren't meeting but in person, but for teachers to actually go in and use in terms of the internet service in the school, that was a challenge also. You didn't have, most of the schools didn't have internet service for the teachers to actually carry on a meeting. And we all know about it, but thank God we're over that phase now and we're getting better. Teacher digital literacy remains a major challenge because a lot of them weren't equipped in terms of how to set up a Zoom meeting, and it. Learning outcomes have declined in low connectivity areas. Multiple model teaching and approach are essential. Long-term policy investment is required to ensure sustainable improvement. Recommended interventions. To address these challenges, the document recommends 8 major interventions. Expand digital infrastructure, including broadband, electricity, and devices. Because some regions, they're still using battery and all of that. They don't have any electricity to charge the phone, the devices. If you need to carry on, you have like 8 persons or a class of 25. You don't have enough to push in terms of having IT set a room and so on for these students. Monitor digital equity using clear indicators. Priority intervention. The most effective strategy is comprehensive digital inclusion approach that combines universal broadband connectivity, equitable access to devices, continuous teaching, training, multiple model infrastructure, and targeted support for interland and low income communities, because those are the ones that are mostly affected. Now, in conclusion, the digital divide remains one of the most significant barriers in the educational system in Guyana. But with coordinate investment, like I mentioned earlier, with the government, and you have all these organizations like Exxon, Rights of the Child, and the others, SBM, if once they continue to be on board in terms of investment, inclusive policies, and sustained commitment, Guyana can create a future where every student, regardless of the geographic location or income, has equal opportunities to learn. Like learn, grow, and succeed. Like those I told you in region 1, I mentioned before, they have some schools, they are not able to write CSEC because they're not equipped for that. And they finish school at up to grade 9. This, I trust that this information with this little video that we create, our group here, it can help. We all could work together and make a change. Thank you for watching. Do have a great day.